Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. This week has brought any number of significant developments in Syria, and over the next hour we'll continue to bring you the latest from activists, government officials and reporters too. We'll also discuss if it's time to consider arming the opposition in Syria, and lots of you have been reacting to the leader of Tunisia saying he may consider offering President al-Assad exile if it means bringing stability sooner to the Syrian people. Wherever you're watching, we're live here on BBC World. You can tweet us using the WHYS and the Syria hashtags. Let's get the conversation underway. Well, let me introduce you to our first three guests. Angie Nassar is a Lebanese-American blogger, and she joins us live from Beirut. In London, we have Anas Nader, a medical student, and also in London is Nuha al-Shara, a Syrian who lives in the UK capital. All three of you, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's talk about this humanitarian effort in Homs at the moment. Angie, do you welcome the Syrian government move to allow the Red Cross in?
I not only welcome it, I think at this point it's completely necessary. The Syrian government has shown little before this point in terms of giving any kind of access to humanitarian groups to get in and help the people who are clearly in harm's way. So this was a necessary move, and I'm glad it's finally happened.
Anas?
Sorry?
Anas?
Well, I mean, it's finally happened, and obviously it's a positive thing that the medical aid is arriving right now on some level. But obviously the problem is at this point, the ICRC is working closely with Syrian Red Crescent, and obviously there are reservations on the Syrian Red Crescent because they work closely with the regime, and some statements made recently by the spokesman of the Red Crescent shows that they're not as impartial as they really should be at this point. So it's a kind of an unfortunate thing, but at least some aid is arriving, and that's a positive thing, obviously.
And Nuha, before I bring you in, I'll mention, because we put this on our Facebook page, we had spoken to the ICRC earlier, and they said that a representative would be able to join us and answer some of your questions for understandable reasons, because they're having an incredibly busy day. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to do that. If they are, of course, we'll put them on air at any time. But just to explain, if those of you who saw that on our Facebook page are confused, at the moment the ICRC aren't able to give us a guest. Nuha, what's your feeling? What are your feelings about what's happening today?
To be honest, I welcome this move, and I feel like it's a good move forward to allow humanitarian aids in the city of Homs and to stop the violence which has been going on for the last month. So I welcome this move, and I think it's very important to make sure that aids and medical support reaches and suppliers reaches people of Homs in this critical time, and especially given the fact that now the situation, or like it's snowing there, and it's very hard for people there. So it's very important to be able to make sure that they get the medical aids and the support they need.
Well, Nuha, Anas and Angie, let me read you this message from Saviour in Cameroon, who's got in touch on our Facebook page. When the government of a country cannot protect its people, but rather goes around killing them, it's the place of the international community to go to their aid. I wonder, Nuha, is that how you see it? This is an outside aid organisation helping people from their own government.
The way I see that the international community could help the Syrian people at this moment is to, instead of encouraging parties to the conflict at this stage, it is necessary to force all parties who are involved in the conflict in Syria to sit down together and start negotiation and stop this violence in Syria at the moment. So I see it, the only way out is negotiation by using all the means to force the regime and force also the opposition. And of course we have two types of opposition. One opposition which clearly boycott all forms of negotiation with the regime, but you have also a position inside Syria and outside Syria also calling for a form of negotiation. So I would really hope to see a genuine interest of the international community of pushing all parties towards this
Okay, well that's an
scenario.
interesting idea, and Anas and Angie, let's pick up on that. the fact that the opposition has pulled out of Bab Amma, the fact that the aid is going in, is this an opportunity to say, OK, let's start again, let's take the government and the opposition and sit down and try and resolve this? Angie, do you think that that Nuha's right? This is an opportunity?
I mean, I don't really think there is any room for negotiation. I don't think Bashar al-Assad's regime is interested in negotiation. I think he's interested in ending the conflict. Negotiation is off the table at this point. If there is any chance for a revolution, it's going to happen, in my opinion, through the arming of the opposition.
Anas, go ahead.
Yeah, I fully agree with that opinion. I mean, the revolution has showed again and again that they're not for negotiations, and the only way they're willing to solve this problem is through military force. And they had over a year right now, and the Western governments and the international community have been trying to push them to negotiate for over a year now, and that hasn't worked. And it's about time for people to understand that this is a regime that will not negotiate with the opposition, and will only want to crush the opposition and crush the activists who basically had to help, get the support of the FSA to protect them on the ground.
I mean, let's bring in Nuha there. I mean, Nuha, you say you want them to talk. Aren't the others right? There's no evidence that either side is really prepared to do that.
I mean that if we carry on this mentality of not trusting that the regime is really wanting to have a form of dialogue, I think this is a big mistake, because at the end of the day, it's the role of the international community, rather than pushing all parties to conflict. The international community could use all its influence to push parties to sit together. The last appeal for negotiation, the last appeal for negotiation, the regime welcomed that, but then you have certain opposition, like in the Syrian opposition, there are so many fractions. Some fractions welcomed this move, but they had their own reservation and having a neutral mediator. But certain opposition, like the National Council, which gets all the coverage, does not want any kind of negotiation.
But Nuha, I suppose the point here is that many countries have drawn the conclusion that it's too late for negotiation with President Assad. He doesn't deserve a place at the negotiating table. And I'm curious, those of you watching, if you would like to speak to Nuha and talk to her about her hopes of negotiation because of the opposition leaving Homs, because of the aid going in. You can call up and speak to her, and indeed any of our guests on today's World Have Your Say. We're live. The number to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We're also across all of you who are tweeting as you watch. We're using the WHYS hashtag and the Syria hashtag. Now here is a tweet from Elaine watching in the UK. I may be naive, but at what point do we decide that there is a moral imperative to intervene in Syria? Angie, in Beirut, where does morality fit into this?
It fits in hugely. I mean, we've heard this week that over 7,500 people have died in the 11th-month-old crisis. And as we've been talking about, I mean, I strongly believe Bashar al-Assad is not concerned with negotiating. And to go back to that point, if there was negotiating, who is he negotiating with? I mean, the Syrian National Council has a lot of faults. It is considered a divided organization. It's considered an organization that's not necessarily in touch with what's going on the ground in Syria. So who is Assad negotiating with, even if we do go back to dialogue once again? Well,
let's talk about that issue and bring in another guest now. Mohammed is a Syrian activist who lives in Washington, D.C., and he's just joining us as Anas leaves us for a moment. Mohammed, we had that statement yesterday in Paris from the Syrian National Council saying it was creating a military committee through which the opposition could unify and organize itself. Did you think that was a good idea, that that was necessary?
I think it's extremely necessary, as Assad forces not going to stop this, and there's no space for negotiation. I'm very surprised to hear that people still talking about negotiation after the UN Human Rights Council and UNHCR talking about extrajudicial execution in Homs and door-to-door execution. I mean, the negotiation point has already passed, and we approach the no-return point. And Assad forces has been shelling Homs indiscriminately. 100,000 population in Baba Amr has been shelled for 25 days, and there's some people talking about negotiation. I don't think anybody who's ready to negotiate would shield his own people in this brutal way and kill the people. 64 members of families killed on one checkpoint by Assad forces, and then we hear again voices about the negotiation. The only way now, the Syrians believe, the only way that they can involve in this is to arm the Free Syrian Army, and that's why they call their Friday today is arming the Free Syrian Army.
Well, as you're talking, Mohammed, we're seeing footage of the snow falling in Homs, but I can also see Nahu shaking her head as you make that statement. Come in, Nahu, let's hear you talk with Mohammed. Nuha?
I mean, in terms of like, I mean, I think why I'm stressing on negotiation is because I have families in Syria, and I have a lot of friends in Syria, and many people in Syria would like to see a form of negotiation. I mean, the matter is not very simple that you are either with the government or with the opposition. There is also a third group who would like to see among Syrians, which sometimes they're called the silent majority, but these people also, they should have a say. And these people also, whether with the government or with the silent majority, would like to see a form of negotiation where all parties, without excluding any party, should sit together and talk. And this is the hope of so many Syrians, not only myself. And if we start arming the Free Syrian Army, we're just gonna aggravate more the civil war, and we're gonna end with more deaths. I mean, you
make a couple of points there. Mohammed, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Sure. First of all, I have family as well inside Syria, dear, and they're delivering me totally 180 degrees opposite view about what you're saying. I don't think people in Syria want Bashar al-Assad to stay in power. Somebody who want to negotiate with the opposition, he's been accusing the opposition of being terrorism or a terrorist organization and armed terrorist groups and Salafists and jihads from the week first in the revolution. In his third-day speech about the protesters, he accused them to be armed people and terrorists, even before the Free Syrian Army was formed. And again, about the silent majority, I don't see the silent majority. They want to get rid of Assad regime, and he formed a new constitution and proposed it for referendum that will put him in power for even longer time before the reforms started in Syria. I don't think that's the situation in Syria, and we don't have a civil war to say we're going to increase the civil war or going to fuel the civil war. We have pro-Assad forces who's committing a brutal human rights violation and crimes against humanity.
I think I should come in here and state something which is probably obvious to most people watching, but it's worth reiterating. It's actually impossible to know exactly what people in Syria think, because it's very hard for Syrian journalists and foreign journalists to move freely and do their research freely within the country. So while we get impressions that in some parts of the country there's support for President Assad, in others very little. It's hard to talk definitively one way or the other. I can see calls coming into points coming in from Mongolia, Ghana, Pakistan, Gambia, Austria, Libya, UK and Switzerland. I'm curious to bring back Angie a moment. Angie, you're living in Beirut at the moment. How are people there following what's happening across the border? Where do their sympathies lie?
It's hard to say. I mean, up until recently, our government officials weren't even coming out and speaking against the Assad regime. Of course, Lebanon has very historic ties to Syria, and there was a time when if anyone did speak out against the regime, their lives were threatened. I mean, you could be killed. So there's been a lot of hesitancy, I think, on a large part of the people here to sort of come out in support of the regime, especially because there's been some anti-Assad demonstrations here where people have actually been targeted, beat up by thugs just for protesting. So it's difficult here to speak out against Assad.
And if you're just turning on your television, Angie's live with us from Beirut, Nuha is live with us from London, Mohammed in Washington, D.C. And I suppose we're exploring three crucial issues here. Is the news that an aid convoy has reached Homs an opportunity for negotiation, as Nuha suggests? There's also discussion from Angie and others about whether it's time to arm the opposition. And there's an issue as well, which we haven't touched on yet, and that's exile. We had the Tunisian leader saying, well, perhaps we should offer President Assad exile if it would resolve the situation. Clearly he's not interested in that at the moment, but it's more the principle of it. Nuha, would you support that if the Tunisian leader offered your leader exile?
I mean, to be honest, it's not for me to if this will lead to an end of violence, I would really welcome that. But I don't see that this is the end of the violence in Syria. I think we should talk about a feasible solution. You're talking about a solution which the Assad government might not agree with, and who are we to decide as well? Like, at the end of the day, I don't know whether he will take up that.
Well, I think it's pretty clear at the moment he wouldn't be interested in that.
Exactly.
I suppose it's more the principle of it. We're going to take a break now, Nuha, but we will come back and talk about this because it's an important issue. Those of you watching, especially if you're in Tunisia, do you think that offer should be on the table for President Assad? You can call us, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Angie, you're a blogger in Beirut. You've said you think the opposition should be armed. Are you not concerned you're putting guns in the hands of people you know very little about?
I mean, I feel like, where should I look exactly?
It's a risk, I think, that has to be taken into consideration. But at this point, we're already into what is an armed conflict. I think there's no way to go from here than there. I mean, we're talking about these political options like sending Bashar al-Assad to Tunisia. That can't happen unless we create the military, pressure to give ourselves political options like that.
All right, you make the case. Those of you watching, do you agree with Angie? Well, whether you agree with her or not, call up and speak to her. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Or if you'd prefer, you can email us and we'll read your email out on air and put your point to Angie. The address is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. We're checking the inbox all of the time. Just looking through some of the messages you're sending in. Ibrahim, a Syrian living in the US, posts on our Facebook page. The opposition is less fragmented than it appears. It only looks disunited because the Assad regime is hampering their ability to communicate. The rebels should be armed, says Ibrahim, agreeing with Angie in Beirut. Now, we're getting lots and lots of calls, as we always do here on BBC World News. Let's bring in Maddie, who's with the World Have Your Say team. And Maddie, you can tell us a bit more about what people are saying.
Yeah, people calling in from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and our Facebook wall is stacking up with comments from people here in the UK, in the United States, Nigeria and Zambia. One question here from Hammer Raw. He says, who will rescue the International Red Cross if they get into danger in Syria? Plenty of people also just getting in touch to tell us about their sadness, really, of how bad things have got for ordinary people living in Homs. This one from Ibrahim in Nigeria. I hope that the Red Cross will be able to evacuate people and take dead people away from the war zone. And this one from Meredith in Ohio. The poor kids, no child should have to fear this. We've also just had a call in from Rita, who's born in Aleppo but lives in Athens at the moment. She says, I want to hear from the other people who don't agree with the revolution. We only hear one side of the story. Keep the comments coming on Facebook and on Twitter. Use the hashtag WHYS.
Thanks, Maddie. Well, we'll respond to a couple of those points. To our viewer in Athens who says, why don't you put more people on who support President Assad? Well, to be honest with you, it's easier to get people on air who are opposed to him. Quite often we'll speak to people and they'll tell us on the phone that they support President Assad. They don't want to come onto the television and say it. But of course, we are interested in hearing both sides of this particular conflict. Thank you very much indeed for calling up. The other question about the ICRC and the safety of its aid workers, I interviewed a spokesperson yesterday and they said they've been assured their aid workers' safety will be respected, but if that were to change, then they would pull their aid workers out of Homs. Now, let me bring in Eunice, who's called us up from Libya. Hi, Eunice. Tell us what your point is.
Hello, sir.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, I just would like to say that they must actually give the army to the revolutionaries. It's the same people, they are killed now by a real army against civilians, and people now suffering with food. I hope the ICRC can do anything as they did here in Libya. It's really something. Yeah, we have been in the same situation here in Libya. I think in Syria now it's much harder and more bloody than what we had in Libya. So it's not easy to see this happen again to the Syrian people, to our brothers there. So we wish them, actually, it's not easy to hear that. So I wish that any intervention from someone to protect the civilians there, to provide food for them, to make sure that the windows have a safe access to the health care.
Yunus, thank you very much for the points that you were making from Libya. Let's put one of them to Anas, who's a Syrian who lives in London but is very much supporting the opposition in his home country. Anas, Yunus there highlighting the strength of the Syrian army as opposed to the slightly lesser strength of Colonel Gaddafi's army. It's a big obstacle, isn't it, to people like you? If the army doesn't support what you're doing, you're unlikely to make progress.
Yes, and I think one of the other big differences between the Syrian and the Libyan situation is the fact that Libya had half of Libya liberated at some point, and Benghazi was the capital of the revolution, which created the safe haven for more of the army to defect and unite and have a better command and control and better organization to fight the Gaddafi forces. Unfortunately, in Syria, we don't have that. The Free Syrian Army has been working in smaller groups and then haven't been able to coordinate as much, and obviously not getting the right amount of support. We're not even mentioning NATO support or no-fly zone. So the least the world and the international community could provide at this point is some sort of a safe zone that allows more of these soldiers to defect and work together, which obviously would tip the balance against the Bashar al-Assad's forces. So going back to your earlier point about the morality of supporting them, I think if the international community is unable to stop the atrocities and the massacres that the Assad forces are committing, then the least they could do is support the ones who are defending the civilians, and at this point the only defenders of the civilians are the FSA.
Noor, how do you feel about your army? Do you feel they've done anything wrong?
You mean the Syrian army?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, of course, the way the government dealt with the whole situation, I don't support the violence or the killing of any civilians, but at the same time, to say that the way out is only by supporting, also by arming a free army, I think we are gonna risk a chaotic situation in the region, and then you don't also know who you are arming as well when you arm the rebels. There are a lot of reports as well about so many Islamists or Qaeda links with the Free Syrian Army. Mm-hmm. And again, in my opinion, war is not the solution. I can't see why we Syrians can't just sit together by the help of the international community, talk and get out of this situation.
Okay, so let's focus in on this issue of if you give weapons to the opposition, you don't know who you're giving weapons to. Mohammed in Washington, D.C., surely that is a justifiable concern.
No, those people who we're looking to arm are members of the army who rejected to open fire on civilians and kill them, and they defected.
But they're not just
aside.
Former members of the army, are there? There are many different factions opposing President Assad.
That's true. At the end, people has the right. I was yesterday at the Capitol Hill here. I heard live the hearing from Ambassador Robert Ford, the U.S. Ambassador to Syria, and Secretary Assistant Jeffrey Feltman, and they both highly agreed in the rights of the people of self-defending themselves when somebody brutal as Assad's forces entering their places, raping their women and killing their children in front of their eyes. It's a human nature. Everybody would self. A cat would defend its small kitties.
And I have to tell you, Mohammed, that there are several issues that people are calling us about. They're calling about the idea of exile for President Assad, about this humanitarian aid going into Homs. But the number one issue people are calling about is this issue of arming the opposition. If you want to join the conversation, tweet us using the hashtag WHYS. You can call country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Halal is watching in Kashmir, says on Facebook, arming the opposition will just pitch the Sunni majority against the ruling Shia minority. We've got lots to talk about. We'll be back here live on BBC World News in a couple of minutes' time.
نشرة تيغري توفيق
I'm Ros Atkins. Thanks for joining me on today's World Have Your Say. Well, first and foremost, we'll continue to bring you the latest on the situation in Syria with that ICRC convoy reaching Homs. We're also discussing with particular passion the issue of whether it's time to arm the rebels in Syria. Do call us on that issue. We'll also discuss whether there should be an offer on the table for President Assad to go into exile. His Tunisian counterpart has said that could be possible in Tunisia. If you're watching there, would you welcome the Syrian leader if it meant peace coming to his country? We're across the WHYS and the Syria hashtag, so if you're tweeting, please do use those. And you can also contribute by phone, text, Facebook and Google+. We're live, so we'll get all of your comments. And if you are on Twitter, you can get me at BBC Ros Atkins. Be good to hear from you. The number to call right now to take part is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Now, as you'd expect, our lead story here at the BBC concerns Syria, and where the ICRC says a convoy carrying food and other aid, well, whether it's arrived in Homs, we believe it has, but it hasn't been able to enter the shattered district of Baba Amma. When it does get in, its first task is to assess the needs of residents trapped there for more than a month. Also, the Syrian authorities say the bodies of two Western journalists, Marie Colvin and Remy Ochlik, killed during the shelling of Homs, have been found and will be repatriated. Two other journalists who are trapped in Homs, Edith Bouvier and William Daniels, are on their way to France after being smuggled into Lebanon. European Union leaders have signed a pact which introduces tougher controls over national budgets and which will allow for sanctions on countries that break the rules. The agreement, aimed at avoiding a repeat of the Eurozone debt crisis, doesn't have the backing of Britain or the Czech Republic. Security officials in northwest Pakistan say a suicide bomb attack on a mosque has killed at least 22 people. This happened as they were returning from prayers in the Tira Valley. And voting has taken place in Iran in the first national election since that disputed presidential poll 3 years ago. That was won by President Ahmadinejad. This election is for the National Assembly and is in effect a contest between two hardline groups. Welcome back. If you do want to email us, World Have Your Say at bbc.com. You can also text country code 44 7786 2060 80. Let me go back first of all to Nuhat, who is a Syrian living in London. And just before the news, Nuhat, you were telling me while we weren't broadcasting how frustrated you get at people who aren't interested in negotiation. But when people have seen some of the footage that's come out of Homs of young children being killed by mortars fired by the Syrian army, it's tough to think about negotiation, isn't it?
I agree with you that it's the footage which we see are horrible, but then you see also footages, you get one side of the story. I mean, there are footages which are horrible from both sides. That's why I'm saying by giving people more arms, we will end up with more horrible scenarios. And the only way to end this conflict is by, whether you have like 7,000 people killed or you have 70,000, you can't just carry on this scenario of violence. There has to be a genuine interest where people and the international community forces all parties to sit down and begin a political procedure where they agree on political reform which will be acceptable to all parties, not only one party.
Okay, Nahu, you make the case. Those of you watching, are you persuaded by the case that she makes? Nuhat is still with us. She'll be live for the next 30 minutes, so you can get your point straight to her. Shagun in Nigeria says, God, I pray that Assad goes and someone sensible takes his place. Only those who have not seen war or have not been on the wrong end of violence can advocate him staying. And Mustaf, watching in Somalia, says, I'm supporting Assad to stay and lead the country the right way. The opposition are simply trying to destroy Syria. Well, let's bring in a number of calls now because our phone lines are incredibly busy. Richard, you're in Berlin. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for calling. What's your point?
Oh, hello, right. Yes, I wanted to say that when the West tries to support an armed insurrection against an established government, effectively they're on the wrong side of legitimate law. Thank God for Russia for pointing out to us this point. President Assad is faced with armed insurrection. And obviously, if this was in England, exactly the same reaction will be taking place now by the British Army. You simply just cannot allow armed insurgents to use weapons and fight government troops without doing anything against it.
Well, Richard, you say thank God for Russia. Let's bring in Sharif. He's a Syrian who works as a personal trainer in London. Sharif, are you glad that Russia is preventing further intervention?
I mean, it's disgusting that Russia has its stance vetoing any measures against Syria. I mean, the revolution only became militarized months into it, and that was because civilians who were protesting peacefully continued to be killed. And in any country where this would continue to happen, eventually people are going to pick up arms and say, we need to defend ourselves. That is the case, that's the fact. It was not militarized from the beginning. So I'm sorry, Bashar Assad caused this upon himself by continuing to kill people and forcing the opposition to arm themselves. It is absolutely absurd to say that Russia is correct in basically aiding and abetting this mass slaughter.
Richard, would you like to reply?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that, of course, whilst obviously everybody decries this sort of slaughter, nobody can really want this to happen. But let's face it, this insurrection is not taking place by accident. It's taking place because various Western governments have an interest in destabilizing the Assad regime.
Can we move on from these conspiracy theories? There's no evidence for this. I'm sorry. I mean, you bring the comparison with England. I mean, I'm sorry, we don't have a government here that would kill thousands of people before people started taking up arms. It simply wouldn't happen.
Sharif, Richard, let me jump in. Thank you for your call, Richard. If you're watching and want to take part, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. I've got a call coming in from Iraq. I'll put on air in a couple of minutes' time. But first of all, let's bring in Malou Innocent, foreign policy analyst at the Cato Institute. Good to have you on the programme. I've read a blog post of yours entitled "Don't Arm the Rebels." For people who haven't seen it, tell us why.
Well, I think this actually gets back to the conversation that was had from the gentleman who is calling in from Berlin in terms of when is state violence permissible. And I think this really gets at the heart of the issue in terms of whether this is an insurrection or whether this is a legitimate struggle for a democratic Syria. My overarching fear, if we begin to arm, if I say we in terms of the United States, begin to arm Syria's rebels, is that it might vindicate Bashar al-Assad's narrative that the insurrection is an appendage of outside forces. We've seen Assad say that these are al-Qaeda elements trying to dismiss the democratic forces as sort of appendages of Israel or the West or the Gulf states. And I think if we sort of see an increase in the amount of assistance going to the insurgents, whether that be small arms or logistical support, that will vindicate Assad's narrative, which actually might strengthen support for the Assad regime for those who are sort of still on the fence about whether to support his regime or not.
Sharif?
Look, I'm aware of the risks of increasing the militarization of this conflict. I'm fully aware of that. But if we do not arm the opposition, this is the situation we have. We have a situation where a very heavily armed government is fighting a very weakly armed opposition. And in this case, it has no incentive to negotiate. And we've seen, with all the efforts of the Arab League so far to get a negotiated settlement, the Assad regime has proven completely unwilling to do so. The Arab League removed ended its observer mission because Syria the government would not abide by the terms that it agreed to. And then the plan that it formulated, where Assad would give up power to his deputy and then have a national unity government followed by elections, the government scoffed at that. So we have no other option.
I completely understand where you're coming from. The issue is if we're going to intervene on the grounds of saving Syrian lives, then it should actually result in fewer Syrians being killed. Yes. We don't know if we begin to arm the Syrian resistance, if it'll crystallize the polarization that we've seen in Syria, if it'll actually weaken the Assad regime politically. We don't know that. I think really right now, Russia does hold the key to peace. And if the United States does want to sort of alleviate the violence and trying to abate the sort of internal polarization within Syria, the best way to go about that is through behind-the-scenes negotiations with Russia. Russia continues to arm the Assad regime. It continues to have billions of dollars of assistance to the Assad regime to carry out its slaughter. And really, I mean, the Assad regime is using tanks and heavy weapons that using small arms for the resistance is futile. Unless you're talking about going big or go home, you're going to need some sort of NATO no-fly zone or actual boots on the ground. But assisting the rebels with small arms is really just setting the resistance up for failure.
Look, until the Assad regime sees that the opposition is getting militarily stronger, it has no incentive to sit down and negotiate. It knows it's the stronger party. If we look at Yemen, for instance, the government was only willing to negotiate and end Saleh Syrian in power because the revolution was creating an increasing military threat against the government, and that's why it sat down and talked. At the moment, you have one party with all the power saying, well, I can do what I want. I mean, there's not going to be nothing to stop me. So not arming the rebels, I see the dangers, but then if we don't do that, we're just preserving the status quo, which is completely unacceptable.
And Sharif, I know as you're talking, Nuha is gently shaking her head. Why are you shaking your head, Nuha?
I think, like, I agree with with what the lady said, that yeah, by arming everybody, you will only escalate the violence and give even more legitimacy for the regime to carry on what they are doing. And also, again, I mean, you don't want to end up with a situation where you arm people and then at the end, like, you risk more chaotic situation in the area, and you might also risk the retaliation and more like ethnic cleansing of certain communities. And to be honest, this is a main concern for so many Syrians. We don't want the situation to increase and escalate. We just want to see a form of all-round reconciliation in the region, where in Syria specifically, where all parties are forced to sit down. It shouldn't be Russia who should play the role of the international mediator. In fact, the Arab League...
I'm sorry, you have completely ignored the fact that the government has shown itself unwilling to negotiate. Basically, the Arab League gave up its efforts, its continuous efforts, because the government wouldn't negotiate.
Actually, in the last meeting in Tunisia, the Friends of Syria, the head of the Syrian National Council didn't call for any military intervention, and all Syrians, they said it's a Syrian issue which Syrians should only solve.
That meeting endorsed the Arab League plan, which the Assad regime rejected. I mean, what you're saying is very nice, very we'd all love to have negotiations, but one party is unwilling to do so. So where do we go from there?
The last call for negotiation was welcomed by certain parts of the opposition. For example, like what they call themselves Hayat al-Tansiq by Hassam Manna. They were willing to sit down and negotiate. A lot of the internal Syrian opposition were also willing to negotiate and sit on the table and try to encourage like a peaceful transmission of power.
Okay, so
the National Security Council and
Sharif, you're also trying to come in, but we've got a break coming up, and I can see Malou is very keen to make a point, and as we've not heard from her for a couple of minutes, do go ahead, Malou.
I was going to say that I think this all assumes that the Arab League has legitimacy within the Assad regime. I think for many within the Assad regime, it's not just Assad himself, but the sort of cadre of supporters that he has, whether military or civilian. The Arab League is sort of viewed, again, as sort of an appendage of the Gulf states. We sort of see the shifting balance of power. Syria was kicked out of the Arab League, or at least its membership was suspended, so to speak. But what legitimacy does the Arab League have? I think the only real force or foreign power that has leverage and influence within Syria and with the Assad regime would be Russia. We don't like Russia. I'm sure we have our own gripes with Russia. We don't like Assad. But if our goal is to end the further killing of Syrians, then we must look for even the most unpalatable option. And the most unpalatable option, even aside from NATO no-fly zones, it appears to be negotiation. People are unwilling to want to negotiate with Russia. And I'm sure it's going to be very difficult, but it's even more difficult to think that we should arm the resistance and then that will be the sort of panacea. I think negotiation is the way to go. It's going to be difficult, but that's the sort of direction we need to head
I'm going to
into.
come in here. Sharif, hold your thought because we've got to have a break. But Malou's using this word legitimacy. She says, is the Arab League legitimate in its involvement? Some people are saying, is the Syrian government got any legitimacy? Others questioning whether the opposition is a legitimate opposition. I'm curious to know from those of you watching, who do you think has a legitimate say in what's happening in Syria? Do get us on Twitter at BBC_WHYS. As you can see, those three are very keen to take on the conversation, but we've got to pause for a couple of minutes, then we'll be right back. Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Thanks for joining me here on BBC World News. This is World Have Your Say. We're live as ever, and we're talking about Syria, the situation there. The latest is that That Red Cross convoy has reached Homs, but as far as we know, it's not in the Bab al-Amma district yet. And we're discussing a number of different issues, whether the rebels should be armed and whether President Assad should be allowed to go into exile if he wanted to. Well, let's cross straight to Maddie, who's with the World Have Your Say team, where all of your calls are being answered. Maddie, give us more of an idea of what's being said.
Well, we've been picking up calls from Algeria, Bangladesh and Tanzania in the past couple of minutes, though. We'll start with someone that's phoned in from California, though, Charles. He told us he wants military intervention in Syria. He says the United Nations needs to step in and help and to approve this. But Abhijit tweeted us, he says the world isn't black and white and that opposing evil isn't necessarily good. He says the international community should be wary before giving total support. Another point of view coming in via someone called Square Root on Twitter, though. This tweet says negotiation only works when parties involved are rational. He says Assad clearly is not. We've also got people getting in touch who were born in Syria but currently living elsewhere, like Lena from the Philippines. She sent us a Facebook message. She says people are dying. Assad should be executed for all the people that he and his army have killed. Thanks for everyone who's got in touch. 47 countries so far.
Thank you very much indeed. And one of those countries, Maddie, is Iraq. Let's bring in Shihab, who's phoned us up. Shihab, tell us what your point is.
Yeah, I think the UN move is too little, too late. What we need now is a massive and immediate aid for the Syrian people and a sort of intervention to stop.
Your line isn't so great, Shihab, which is a shame. But what I can hear you say is that the UN is taking too long to take action. It's a criticism we've heard quite often from BBC World News viewers. Thanks for making that point. Brian in the UK has tweeted us. Let's have a look at this by pulling it up on the screen. It's pragmatic for someone to offer Assad asylum. If there's even the slightest chance, it would help end the violence. Well, Sharif, Nuha and Malou, quick answers from you on this issue. Malou, should he be offered exile?
He can be, but what are you going to do with the Alawite Shias who have supported the regime? I think there's going to be a lot of violence directed at them. We've seen this from the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood saying that they are willing to exterminate the Shia Alawites that supported the Assad regime. I think the more fruitful discussion is what is Washington willing to trade to Moscow to get Moscow to encourage Damascus to relent on the violence and to create a unity
well, that's
government.
a whole other area which we're not going to get into in 90 seconds. Sharif, 30 seconds from you. Would you allow him to go to Tunisia if he wanted to?
I would prefer him to face justice in an international court, but failing that, if he was willing to accept asylum, then yes, I think that would be the right move. But I don't see him accepting that anytime soon. Ideally, justice. If not, if it's in the interest of saving much more Syrian lives, then asylum.
Nuha, what about you?
I think any offer should be feasible, whether Assad will agree or not. This is, I don't think the issue is whether Assad will agree to this, because I can't see him agreeing. And as Mali said, the issue is like, how would we promote negotiation and make sure that all sects of the Syrian society, all different ethnic groups in the Syrian society have their say.
All three of you, thank you very much indeed. Sharif and Nuha in London, Malou live with us from Washington, D.C. And of course, thanks to all of you in over 50 countries now who have called up World Have Your Say to talk about Syria. As ever, we never get you all onto the air, but in 3.5 hours' time, I'll be back with World Have Your Say Extra to try and speak to some more of you. And also remember, World Have Your Say is on the radio as well, bbcworldservice.com. Tune in 2 hours' time where we'll continue our conversations about Syria. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.